In a land marked by chaos and oppression, where each day it seemed darker than the previous one, there was a forgotten people, hidden under the yoke of a powerful enemy. The Canaanites, commanded by Jabim, king of Hazor, ruled with brutality and fear. His iron cars, gleaming as steel beasts, cut the valleys of Israel, reminding the people that freedom was just a distant dream. But it was in this scenario of despair that God began to prepare an unlikely path of salvation. Barak was born in the city of Queses, in an isolated region in the tribe of Naphtali. It was a simple village, surrounded by mountains and woods that seemed to murmur old stories in the wind. There, between Campos and Colinas, a common man grew, with no large deeds or marks that highlighted him. However, God, as always, looked beyond appearances. While the Canaanites sported their power, setting up strategies in stone fortresses, the Creator watched waiting for the right time to call a new leader. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting biblical stories and activate the notification bell not to miss any video. At that time, Deborah, a woman full of wisdom and courage, guided Israel as a prophetess and judge. Sitting under a palm tree, she listened to the people's problems, cried to God, and offered advice. It was there, under the shadow of that sacred tree, that Deborah received a message that would change the story. Barak should lead Israel to the battle against Jabim. But the curious thing is that God's choice seemed to contradict human logic. Barak was not a consecrated warrior, nor someone in a bold spirit. His strength was in the willingness to obey, even without understanding what was to come. The message was clear. It was time to call 10,000 men and get down to Mount Tabor, but how would Barak react to such a great call? When Barak received Deborah's message, it was as if the weight of the sky had fallen on his shoulders. He was not someone who sought prominence, nor a military leader with years of battle experience. He was a countryman, accustomed to the silence of the mountains and the simple work. But now, there before Deborah, he found himself at the center of a divine call that looked too big for him. The prophetess, with her firm posture and look that seemed to see beyond the present, repeated the order of God. Barak should gather 10,000 men from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun and face the Canaanites. The idea of facing Jabim and his dreaded commander Sisera with his invincible iron cars was more than scary. The image of these giant vehicles cutting the valley as monsters in march made the heart of any man shake. Barak knew that the chances, in human eyes, were minimal. It was impossible not to ask yourself, why now? It was then that he gave voice to what seemed to hammer his mind. He told Deborah, with a mix of sincerity and seizure, that he would only accept to go if she accompanied him. It was an unusual and even risky request. Deborah, a woman, walked side by side with an army of men, but Barak knew that her presence represented something more, the certainty that God was in the middle of that mission. Deborah accepted, but not without a warning. Your voice echoed firmly. I will go with you, but know that because of that, the honor of victory will not be yours. The Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman. Those words were in the air like a puzzle. Who would this woman be? What role would she have in God's plan? As the army was beginning to form, the fate of Barak and Israel was about to take a turn that no one could predict. Deborah's words echoed in Barak's mind as he began to gather the men who would fight beside him. The responsibility was immense, and the warning of the prophetess only made everything more intriguing. A woman would receive the honor of victory. Who would it be? Deborah? Another unexpected figure? The mystery seemed to involve every step of that journey. Still, Barak could not afford to hesitate. He knew the battle was approaching and that time was not in his favor. As he walked through the villages of Naphtali and Zebulun, calling men to war, it was impossible not to notice the eyes of uncertainty in people's faces. Many remembered the overwhelming strength of Sisera and its unqualified iron cars, such as mobile walls. There were murmurs of fear, but also sparks of hope. Something in the call of Barak, perhaps his silent courage or the fact that Deborah was by her side, began to inspire those who were tired of oppression. One by one, men joined the army, armed more with faith than with swords. When the number finally reached 10,000, Barak led them to Mount Tabor. From there, he had a clear view of the valley where Sisera's army gathered. The contrast was striking. Barak's soldiers were pastors and farmers, simple men who exchanged hoes for makeshift spears. Meanwhile, on the horizon, Sisera's iron cars were glowed as predators ready to attack. Deborah, always next to Barak, watched everything calmly. It was then that she approached him, and with a serenity that seemed sharp, whispered, "The Lord has already begun to deliver Sisera into his hands. Go down, Barak, time has come." But how could he come down against that powerful army? Deep down, he knew that the true leader of that battle was neither him nor Deborah, but God himself. The tension in the air was palpable, and something seemed about to explode. Mount Tabor was silent that morning, as if nature itself arrested breathing in the face of what was about to happen. The army of Barak, formed by simple men, was in position, his makeshift weapons reflecting the sunlight. From the top of the mountain, they could see the valley below, where Sisera's army prepared with its overwhelming strength. Iron cars, aligned as a row of predators, gleamed threateningly. The floor seemed to vibrate with the sound of the wheels and the movement of the troops. Barak looked at Deborah, seeking some confirmation. She remained calm, as if she knew something no one else could see. His gaze was firm, his unshakable faith. "The Lord has already started to act," she repeated. But Barak knew that the words were not just a reminder, they were an order to move forward. The moment had arrived. With a sign, Barak began to lead his men's mountain below. The descent was quick, and the rhythmic steps of the soldiers echoed like thunder on the slope. What seemed like a simple makeshift army now moved with determination, as if every man knew he would not only fight for his freedom, but also for the honor of the God of Israel. Each step was a declaration of faith amid fear, but something surprising happened. As soon as Barak's men advanced to the valley, dark clouds began to form in the sky, and the wind brought with it a smell of rain. In a short time, a violent storm collapsed over the battlefield. The rains were torrential, and the floor turned into mud, swallowing the wheels of Sisera's iron cars. What once seemed like an invincible weapon was now a dead weight. The fearsome cars were arrested, immovable, while Barak's army advanced with a force that was not only human. The battle began. Swords shocked, screams echoed, and the rain did not give in respite. But in the midst of chaos, Sisera, realizing that everything was lost, made an unexpected decision. He abandoned his car and fled on foot, disappearing in the storm. The rain did not cease, and each drop seemed to fall with purpose, as if the sky were determined to turn the course of that battle. Iron cars, which were once the pride and safety of Sisera's army, were now sunk in mud, real estate, useless. Canaanite soldiers, confused and desperate, struggled to escape, but there was nowhere to run. The treacherous floor held them as invisible currents, while Barak troops, with renewed courage, advanced as an unstoppable wave. Barak led his men with a determination that seemed to come from something bigger. He was no longer the man who hesitated at the beginning, who needed the safety of Deborah's presence. At that moment he was the leader God had called, and his steps were firm, even in the midst of mud and chaos. The simple weapons of their soldiers were now liberation tools, each blow a step closer to victory. The battlefield became a ruin stage for the Canaanites. The sound of the wheels attached to the earth, the screams of soldiers, and the rain thunder created a judgment symphony. The storm, with its relentless strength, seemed almost alive, as if it were on Israel's side. Sisera, realizing that defeat was inevitable, did something no one expected. He, the commander who was feared by all, abandoned his car, symbol of his power, and fled on foot. The decision was desperate, but also revealed how much he feared the defeat. As Sisera ran, disappearing in the distance, Barak and her men continued the fight. Every step that consolidated the fall of Jabin and his oppression over Israel. But Sisera was still loose, and the story was not complete. He sought refuge, and his steps would lead him directly to the next chapter of this story, where the unexpected waiting to seal the fate of the one who thought he was safe. Sisera ran. Every step that took seemed an echo of his defeat. Every heavy breath reminding him that the unthinkable had happened, the invincible had been overcome. The Canaanite commander, who once drove armies with authority, was now alone, without guns, without car, without soldiers. The mud stuck to his feet and made his escape difficult, while the sound of the battle, though distant, still echoed behind him. He knew he couldn't stop. He needed to find a hiding place, anywhere that gave him a chance to survive that humiliation. And it was then that he spotted something unexpected, an isolated tent amid the wet and chaotic landscape. It was the tent of Jael, Heber's wife, Queno. Sisera knew who the Quenos were. Heber had a peace agreement with Jabin, king Canaanite, and so he believed that was a safe place. The tiredness and despair pushed him into the entrance of the tent, where Jael received him with a calm and welcoming look. He had no reason to doubt her. With a soft hospitality voice, Jael invited him in. "Rest here," she said, offering him a place to lie down. Sisera, exhausted and confident that he was among allies, accepted without question. She covered him with a blanket, and when he ordered water, she brought her milk, something that seemed even luxurious to someone who had just left a battle. The tension in the air seemed to decrease. Sisera, thinking it was finally safe, relaxed. Before closing her eyes, she asked her to watch the tent entrance and don't let anyone know that he was there. Jael, with light steps, moved around the tent, every calculated gesture, every look loaded with intention. Sisera, now asleep, had no idea what awaited him. Inside the tent, the silence was almost absolute, broken only by the sound of Sisera's heavy breath, now delivered to a deep sleep. The hot milk that Jael had offered him seemed to have fulfilled his role, calming him and leaving him vulnerable. Outside, the storm was beginning to give signs that it weakened, but within that small space, a much larger storm was about to graduate. Jael remained motionless for a moment, as if contemplating what he was about to do. His previously serene countenance was now carrying a cold determination. Every movement of yours was calculated, every step taken with the care not to break the silence. She approached Sisera, who was completely oblivious to the danger that surrounded him. The scene seemed frozen in time, but Jael's heart beat like a drum, marking the rhythm of his courage. She took a tent stake, an ordinary object for a woman living in those lands, and firmly held a hammer on her other hand. The tools, so simple, became weapons in the hands of someone who knew that Israel's fate was also there, at that time, at that moment. Jael knelt alongside the sleeping general, his eyes fixed on him as if he saw more than just a man, perhaps a shadow of all he represented: oppression, fear, Canaanite rule. With a quick and accurate blow, she stuck the stake in Sisera's temple. The sound was dry, muffled, but enough to mark the end of the man who feared so many. He did not have time to react, and his body was still, sealing his destination at the same time. Jael got up, his hands still firm, but his gaze now seemed lighter. As the tent became the stage of an unexpected victory, Barak's footsteps approached. He came after Sisera, determined to capture him, but had no idea what he awaited him as he crossed that threshold. Barak came to the tent with hasty steps, still carrying the adrenaline of the battle. Sisera's trail had guided him there, and he knew he was close to capturing the dreaded Canaanite commander. The idea of facing the man who had so terrorized Israel made the heart of Barak beat faster, but he also carried the certainty that God was already conducting every part of that outcome. The silence around the tent was intriguing, almost disturbing, But he did not hesitate to approach. Even before he could ask, Jael appeared at the entrance of the tent. His face was calm, but there was something in his gaze that caught the attention of Barak. It was as if she knew exactly what he wanted to hear. With a firm but serene voice, she said, "Entrez, and I will show you the man you are looking for." Barak came in, and what he saw left him speechless. There was Sisera, fallen, immovable, with the stake still stuck in his temple. The man who spread terror through Israel, who commanded with arrogance and cruelty, now lay defeated in a way that no one could imagine. He was not a soldier, not a sword, not even the strength of an army that knocked him down. It was Jael, a woman armed with her courage only and the simple tools of her daily life, who delivered the victory to the hands of Israel. While Barak contemplated the scene, the magnitude of what had happened began to reveal itself. Deborah's prophecy finally made sense. The victory over Sisera, the maximum symbol of Canaanite power, was given to a woman, as you had announced. And although the battle had been won in the valley, it was there in that silent tent that the true blow against the oppressors had been sealed. But the story was not yet complete. The news of Sisera's death spread like fire in dry straw. Where the messengers passed, the hearts were filled with surprise and relief. It was hard to believe that the commander who had imposed so much fear over Israel was no longer alive, and even less that he had fallen through a woman's hands. Every detail of the story seemed to carry a touch of divine intervention. Iron cars stuck in the mud, the unexpected storm, the courage of Jael. Everything pointed to the fact that this victory was not only military, but heavenly. Barak, now confirming that the enemy had been destroyed, returned to camp with Deborah. There, the soldiers were looking forward to the miracle they had witnessed. Many of them were ordinary men who had never held a sword before that battle. However, they were instruments of something much bigger. The victory was not theirs, neither of Barak, but of the God who had guided them. It was then that Deborah, with the strength of her voice, rose to lead the people in a song. The sound was powerful, a mixture of celebration and reverence. It was more than a song. It was a living poem that narrated every detail of the battle, from the call of Barak to the moment Jael defeated Sisera. The words, rich in images, described nature rising against the enemy, the powerless iron cars before the mud, and the clamor of the people for freedom finally being attended. Each verse exalted God's action and celebrated those who, even hesitant, responded to the call. Jael was described as the most blessed among women, his highlighted courage in the midst of an unlikely scenario. But there was also a feeling of renewal among the people. The oppression of Jabin, king of Hazor, was weakened, and the way to freedom was beginning to open. With a dead Sisera and the Canaanite army completely defeated, the impact of victory began to transform the land of Israel. The news not only brought relief, but also renewed the hope of a people who had lived under the weight of oppression so long. Jabin, the mighty king of Hazor, saw his dominion begin to collapse. Without Sisera and his army, he lost the strength he kept Israel under control. The king's fall did not immediately come, but Jael's battle and the courage of Jael marked the beginning of his end. The days that followed were reconstruction and reflection. The people of Israel, now free from immediate fear, began to remember the deeds that God had performed on that day. Deborah's presence, Barak's leadership, and Jael's unexpected act were discussed in every corner of the earth. There was something extraordinary in the way every detail of the story seemed perfectly aligned, as if heaven himself had written that outcome. Barak, the man who had hesitated before the call, was now seen as a hero. Not because he was perfect or fearless, but because, despite his doubts, he chose to obey. He followed Deborah's voice and, most importantly, trusted God's plan, even when she seemed impossible. He led simple men against a powerful army and saw the impossible happen before his eyes. Its history was not about human strength or strategy, but about what can happen when someone is willing to trust. the land experienced peace for 40 years, a rest that the people had not known for a long time. But the lessons left by Barak, Deborah, and Jael echoed, challenging the following generations to look beyond their weaknesses and trust a God who uses the unlikely to perform the extraordinary. After all, Barak's journey was not just about winning a battle, but about teaching that true strength comes from trusting what seems impossible. Barak's story is not just about a defeated battle or a defeated enemy. It is about what happens when ordinary people choose to trust an extraordinary God. Barak, with all his doubts and insecurities, accepted a call that seemed greater than him. He was not perfect, not the brave or strongest, but even so, God chose him. And perhaps this is the greatest lesson in your life. God does not call the preparations, He prepares the calls. Throughout his journey, Barak teaches us that hesitation is not the end of the way. He asked Deborah's presence, and although this could be seen as weakness, it was also a gesture of humility. He acknowledged that he could not do that alone. Many times, we are so stuck to the idea that we need to be self-sufficient, that we forget that there is strength to seek help, to trust others, and above all, to depend on God. And then there is the unlikely outcome of his story, with Jael, a woman that no one expected, performing the act that brought the final victory. This reminds us that God is not limited by human expectations. He uses who he wants, as he chooses, to fulfill his purposes. Barak had to learn that in the end, the honor of victory did not matter as much as obeying the call. For 40 years, Israel lived in peace after that battle. But more than tranquility on earth, the people received a lesson that would echo for generations. Even in the midst of greater weakness, God can accomplish the impossible. Barak teaches us that true strength is not in the hands that wield swords, but in the hearts that trust the divine plan, even when the path seems uncertain. And so its story remains, not only as a chapter on the pages of the Bible, but as a living invitation to each of us. After all, who knows what God can do with those who, like Barak, say yes, even in the face of fear. If you liked Barak's story and want to keep following other stories of faith and overcoming, be sure to enjoy this video and share with those you love. And of course, subscribe to the channel so as not to lose any new content. Together, let's explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.